G'day, sir.
How you doing?
I'm doing great. You?
I like that shirt.
I put it on just for you. My staff, God love them,
Yeah.
at our we have a company retreat, and about a week before the retreat, I turn on one of our radio stations, and the afternoon guys are talking about how we're doing this big company event,
Yeah.
and somehow I just happened to be listening, and they started talking about me, and one of them said, the thing about John is he dresses like a really cool youth pastor. Because I usually wear like a printed T-shirt so I started buying crazy shirts just to let them know that I can be crazy too.
Okay, I dig it so much. Now let's do our screen cap now,
Sure,
and we'll go in, and then I'll get you out of here by 11:30 for
sure.
your next thing. Okay, so I'll count you in here.
Okay.
All right, look cool. Yeah, there you go. Look at you. Okay. All right, three, two. Okay, let's cue the music and let's do this thing. Okay, John, you ready to rock?
Let's do it, my man.
All right, man. Here we go.
What up, Mike? Toronto. VK on the beat. Check. I'm in Toronto, where you wanna get the city love. I'm from Toronto, where you wanna get the city love. I'm in Toronto, like we wanna get the city love. My city love me back for my city love.
Welcome to episode 1429 of Toronto Mic'd, proudly brought to you by Great Lakes Brewery, a fiercely independent craft brewery who believes in supporting communities, good times, and brewing amazing beer. Order online for free local home delivery in the GTA. Palma Pasta. Enjoy the taste of fresh, homemade Italian pasta and entrees from Palma Pasta in Mississauga and Oakville. RecycleMyElectronics.ca. Committing to our planet's future means properly recycling our electronics of the past. The Advantaged Investor Podcast from Raymond James Canada. Valuable perspective for Canadian investors who want to remain knowledgeable, informed, and focused on long-term success. And Ridley Funeral Home, pillars of the community since 1921. Today, returning to Toronto Mic'd is FOTM John Paul. Welcome back, John.
I love hearing the long stop set before we get into the content. It's so great to hear those sponsors. Well done, my man.
Well done to you. We're going to get into it, but first, big question off the top, John. Will you be my Valentine?
100% I would be your Valentine. I can't think of anyone else I'd rather have a nice meal with. Perhaps some pasta.
Well, listen, are we ever going to meet in person or what, John? This is your second appearance, both via Zoom. When am I going to meet you? I can get you some Palma pasta and some fresh craft beer from Great Lakes.
I feel guilty. I was in Toronto yesterday, and I actually thought maybe I should stay and go to the basement. And I'm not going to lie to you, there was a weird part of me that said, am I changing my entire travel to go to a man I'd never met before's basement? It didn't seem to work out. Plus, I had to be back for a very important hockey practice and subsequent volleyball and basketball game with my kids. So, but it will happen. It will happen.
Your third appearance will be here in the basement. How's this? I'm going to hold out. You don't get to come back on Toronto Mic'd unless I get you in the basement.
That is a deal, my friend. That is a deal.
So we're going to get into it. This is going to be a 60-minute special. We talked, John, in February 2021, so almost exactly 3 years ago. This was episode 803, so I'm just going to let people know if they want to go back and hear the A to Z of John Paul's career in radio, they can go to episode 803. Here is the description I wrote at the time. Mike chats with John Paul about his years working for CFRB in the early 90s, how he came to own several radio stations. That's going to come up again in a moment. His recent role at News Talk 1010, hosting the Night Side with John Paul for stations in Montreal and Windsor. This is going to come up too, how he was fired by Bell Media. That happened, John. And how he would have done that differently. I got to go listen back to know what that means. Anyways, we talked for 90 minutes that first time. We're going to talk for about 60 minutes. But let's get to the meat of this. It was announced last week that Bell was selling 45 radio stations in smaller markets. John Paul, What's your take on all this? What's your take on what Bell is doing with their radio stations?
Well, I think anyone in the industry would have predicted that perhaps one of the larger companies, whether it be Bell or Chorus or Rogers, would be taking this tact at some point in the future. And I think it's partly because, one, I don't think that they would in a boardroom say that's their area of expertise, the smaller markets. And two, I think, and again, I'm outside the bottle on this one, so it's just my observation. I think a lot of times the bigger companies really bought into content, and they wanted to tie it in with cell phones and things like that. And I think the way the world changed, platforms like what you're doing and YouTube and TikTok, all those things sort of came along. And I think they realized that this dream of having all of these content creators that they would control and be able to monetize, I don't know if that ever came to fruition. And in all of that, they were trying to run this business that in some cases, not for all the companies, but maybe in Bell's case a little bit, it was a monster they weren't really familiar with, that has a creative / science mix to it to make it successful. And it can't be a financial sheet. You can't your way to excellence.
Do you think Bell is good at radio?
You know, it's hard today when I found out one of the greatest morning shows in the history of Ottawa, you got turfed yesterday. It's not a move I would have ever made, because that morning show, whether you like their bits or not, or the music they played, as people and as people that represent the city of Ottawa, they just did a tremendous job. And it's not a radio move I would make. So it's hard to say that I would subscribe to that's a great radio operator. However, I understand the pressures that they're under. I think that they have done some really good stuff. Unfortunately, since the pandemic, they have been scrambling, might be the word I've used. And if there's 10 decisions they've made, they're not the ones I would have made, but I'm not under the financial pressure that they're under. So maybe if I was in their boots, I would make similar decisions. But I can tell you, from a perspective, just as a guy in radio who loves radio and admires the products and brands they have, I think News Talk 1010 had a lot of really good years as a fabulous radio station since they blew out the newsroom and stuff. I mean, I listened the other day, it still sounds really good, and there's still really good people on there. They just didn't do it the way I would do it, but that doesn't mean my way would be more right. It would just be more radio, because I'm a radio guy versus a cell phone guy versus a cable guy versus a telecom guy.
Well, we're going to get into that. I guess my broadcasting corporation doesn't have like internet service available or cable products to sell.
No, we have radio stations, and we make our money selling advertising and doing those things. And obviously we purchased, we were part of the group of buyers for those stations, and we bought Kingston and Brockville. And certainly one of the questions that I get asked a lot is, well, why are you going to be successful when Bell seemingly hasn't been successful? And radio is an interesting monster, because we have two customers. We're very unique in the sense that most businesses have one customer. We have two customers. We have the audience, the people that listen, and we have the clients, the people that want the audience to come and do business with them, whatever that is. And, radio works best when you have what's called TSL, time spent listening. And it's weird because the radio industry doesn't talk about this number as being important, but I believe it's the only important number, because time spent listening means that Mike turns on my radio station and he listens for an hour, 90 minutes, 2 hours, 6 hours, whatever it is. And why that's valuable is because you'll hear Palma Pasta 3 or 4 times, and you'll create a relationship with them. And if we've done a good job and they do a good job, you'll go buy some pasta from them again and again and again. So in that sense, you've got to have a really good plan to build that time spent listening for the audience. So you got to do the things that they like. But then on the other side, for the clients, what the clients really want is, obviously, yes, they want to be successful. They want to turn their dollar into $1.50 or $2, get a return on their investment. But they view local radio also as a tool that they use to create their brand, obviously be involved in the community and things that the radio stations traditionally are involved in. It's an easy way for them to hop on and be involved with a food drive or the local hockey team. And it's also credibility. Radio offers that third party credibility in some markets, that if you're on that radio station, the audience goes, hey, if you're here, that means something. And I think if we look at sort of how Bell's done it, is they've lost some of those things. Credibility might be, losing the newsrooms. They lose a little bit there. Maybe they're not doing as much in the communities as maybe our company does. So they've got some of the parts right, but maybe not enough of them.
All right, I'm going to go back and then we're going to revisit all this, because you can imagine I'm a curious cat here. But you mentioned this morning show in Ottawa, so I got to plead a little ignorance. I did read a little bit yesterday about Stuntman Stu.
Yep.
And could you just educate me a little bit, as a guy who doesn't pick up Ottawa radio in his car? Like tell me a bit about this morning show, and just give me a vibe of like what kind of a legacy morning show this was that got turfed yesterday in Ottawa by Bell.
Yeah, so Stu is, he's Stuntman Stu because originally he was on the rock station and he was the young guy that would go out and do the goofy stunts. He did a very smart thing, that while he was doing those goofy stunts, he always made sure he did things in the community. So he just became a guy that kind of transformed from being the goofy stunt guy to the guy that everyone liked, because he helped out kids with cancer and he helped out the hockey teams and he did all that stuff. He parlayed that into an opportunity to host what is the Chum FM of Ottawa, and host the morning show. Angie Poirier, who was his co-host, she came from the TV side of the business. Again, almost the exact same story on the female side. Was on TV, was always involved in community things, is emceeing everything, has kids, tells great stories. And I'm not familiar with the third person on the team as much, because I don't spend a lot of time listening, but I just know from Angie and Stu's point of view, they do a ton of stuff in the community. Their show, when you listen to it, it was, pretty much a standard adult contemporary morning show. The last time I listened, they were arguing about whether mustard should be kept in the fridge, which again, for the audience they're targeting, that's probably exactly right in there. They don't talk too much. They're funny. They're cute. They're always working Ottawa things into everything they do. Just a really good morning show. Obviously you could critique it and go, well, they could be this, they could be that, but just the parts of what make radio great. And if you look at that stuff I just mentioned, like credibility, being in the community, that's the stuff that makes radio magnetic. And one of the challenges is, if you look at that morning show and why, I look at it as a mistake, and again, maybe on a spreadsheet somewhere, it's not, radio is pretty simple, because you have two types of people that work in radio. You have people that are technically proficient. They can hit the posts, they can show up, they can mix right, they can read the liner cards, they can follow all the rules of radio, the setup, the teases, the payoffs. They're technically proficient. But the real goal is to become magnetic, where people want to come to you. And I believe that Stuntman Stu and Angie, they were magnetic. They brought people to them, not specifically because of the bits, but because of what they did in the community. And certainly there's lots of examples of that in Toronto radio as well, whether it's, John Oakley, or, back in the day, Wally Crowder, or obviously Roger Rick in Maryland, or John Moore. There's lots of great examples of people that not only are they technically proficient, they're also magnetic. You want to find out what they've got to say.
So you use the S word, John, spreadsheets. Okay. So,
yeah.
So again, we're speculating here, everybody. John doesn't work for the decision makers at Bell Media here,
No.
but it feels like, and you would concur, that this is simply a cost-cutting measure. Like Stuntman Stu, remember a pillar, much like Ridley Funeral Home, a pillar of the community. Okay, does a great job. People seem to. You mentioned magnetic. They like this morning show. They've been there a long time, right? They've been there a while, and possibly because these people have been there a while, they make a adult salary that would let them live a reasonable middle class lifestyle, and perhaps that number triggered some alarm. And Bell, which only made didn't make enough $1 billion last year, is going to cut a few bucks off the radio line in Ottawa. Is that what it sounds like to you?
Well, look, we have to be fair to Bell in the sense that they work in an arena where investors invest in the company. And Bell, to its credit, one of the things they have done very well is return impressive dividends to those investors. So if you're an investor in Bell and you're just, taking your shekels from them, you're probably very happy because you go, hey, whatever you guys do, whatever, I trust you to do the work. So from that point of view, I understand they have other obligations to meet that they are actually measured on. At the end of the day, every business is measured on the profit it generates. We are capitalists, so I can't knock them for that. But I can say, and I maintain that as someone who invests in Bell, I put a little bit of my money in there too, because again, they pay great dividends. I'm the kind of guy where I'm like, hey, look, I'm happy to take a little less to give the country a little more. Like I invest in because they're a great company, and I don't necessarily have to make an extra 3 cents. That said, the challenge is a lot of people's mutual funds, teachers' pensions, all those sorts of big conglomerates, they're investing in Bell, and they got a lot of people that are retired that need a return on their investment to pay their bills. So it's an ugly circle that exists. But in my opinion, if you're saying, do I think these cuts were purely financial? I think they're way more financial than they are performance based.
You use the another S word, shareholders there.
Yes.
Okay. And I'm going to use another S word in a good way, though. FOTM Sharon Taylor. Do you know Sharon?
I do.
Okay. So I always value her input, much like you, John. She's a beloved FOTM, and I can turn to her and get some thoughts and analysis, some insight. And she points out some obvious things, but I think we need to visit it here. Before we get back to the 4 stations you bought from Bell, and I have very specific questions about you and my broadcasting corporation and et cetera. But like Bell, BCE, they are a telecom company. All the money is in cell phones and internet connectivity and cable, et cetera, et cetera. So radio is like this pimple on the back of some elephant. Like it seems like it's like less than, I don't know, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but like Sharon speculates that it's 1% of their business is radio.
It was explained to me that on their list of stuff that they do, it's right near kiosks on importance.
Right.
I don't know if that's true, but it sounds about
another
right.
number that Sharon tosses around, and I don't know if this is accurate, but she tosses around. Okay, so if there's a profit of 22% profit on this business, to Bell, it's not even worth the trouble. 22% on this less than 1% thing. Sorry, Bell's got bigger fish to fry, bigger priorities. We're able to shareholders focus on what's going to make them real money. Meanwhile, for a smaller radio operation that focuses on radio, and we're going to get back to you, John, but 22%, that's something you can pay yourself a decent salary. You can employ people in the community. You can make a difference. You can grow. That's the difference between BCE owning these stations and the smaller operations who bought up these 45 stations in smaller markets.
Yeah, really 100%. And if you look at sort of the history of those stations, and whether it's Standard Broadcasting or Chum, those portions of those stations now are under the Bell headline.
Astral.
Yeah, when they were running with guys and gals like me that ran them, and they operated number one at a time where it was easier to do and the money came in and there was less competition, and they ran them really well on top of that, so their margins were very impressive, and that really did attract people to want to buy them. And then the dream was that the efficiencies and the technologies and the layering of all the stuff we could sell, wow, if we put this all together, it would be incredible, which in a boardroom on a whiteboard probably makes sense. The challenge is, I think it would be fair to say Bell is not operating their stations like Chum operated them, and or like Standard operated them, and or Astral operated them. They're trying to fit them into what they do, and the reality is they don't. And at the same time, they've seen those incredible margins drop. And some of that's through maybe their own failure of operation. Some of it's obviously through pandemic and changing times and all those sorts of things. But it does make it less lucrative to them. And I think if it's less lucrative and they don't have the answer, like when the legal guy comes out and goes, these aren't viable businesses, which is like a slap in the face to everyone who works for them, advertises with them, guys who bought stations from them. What that signals more than anything is they're disconnected from the business and the people of the business, and they just don't see it. And that probably happens in business every day of the year, in every business category. There's a person that doesn't see it anymore, and there's another person that goes, you don't see it because you're being blinded by whatever it is. Let me show you how we can make it work.
Okay, well, that's the money shot, right? Is, the exact quote, I'm going to see if I can dig it up here, but it was, okay, it's from Bell Chief Legal and Regulatory Officer Robert Malcolmson, and he's talking to the Canadian press, and he says, it's because it's not a viable business anymore with regards to radio. So that's the money quote. Like, that's your headline, everybody. Bell saying it's not a viable business anymore, which begs the question of why they didn't sell all the stations. They only sold 45, but we'll get to that. But you, John Paul, do you think radio is a viable business in 2024?
Yes, I do. And obviously I wouldn't have bought the stations if I didn't. But more importantly, I believe it's a viable business because I operate a bunch of them that make profits and do great things in the community. And, maybe the difference is, as you pointed out, our margins are okay for a guy like me. Like, I don't need to have a 50% return, nor would I operate the business that way. And that's partly just because I don't need a private jet. I cut my own grass. I do my own laundry, and I don't see a day where I want all that stuff. It's just not who I am. So I'm happy with our margins. They give us the ability to continue to grow. They give us the ability to, remunerate our staff. We've worked really hard at that. I think everyone always wants to make more money, but I think we do better than most. It gives us the opportunity to do fun things with our staff. We do retreats, and I wear goofy shirts. So it works for me. And I also, because I'm so much closer to our advertisers, like a lot of our advertisers are my friends, I know how hard the shoe store and the restaurant and the car dealer, I know how hard they work for much smaller margins, and they're very successful, and they're doing the same things for the community and their staff. So I don't feel that if all of a sudden we don't turn, a 40% margin, that we failed. I think we just operate the business within that. Now, we have myself and my business partner, Andrew Dixon, as shareholders, and we're not responsible for funding, the teacher's pension and all the people that have invested in this big conglomerate of our company. So if we take a hit, I take a hit. I'm the last guy to get paid. So it all works out in our little world. And I think it will work out in the same world for the Durham radios and the Vistas. And Vista might be slightly different because they're owned by one of the wealthiest people in Canada. But they run a very similar plan. And, the guys at White Oaks Capital Communications, it's going to be the same thing. Like, they're just going to run a really good business that's fun to do. And if you do it right, you make some money.
Okay, so let's get to the specifics. You alluded to it earlier, but so what are you? You're in a partnership with this Mr. Dixon. What's his first name?
Andrew, yeah. So we started the company together 2004.
Okay, and the company's called My Broadcasting Corporation.
Yep.
Okay. I know we covered all this your first visit, but got to set the table here again. Okay, so how many stations? So you have bought, I mentioned that Bell sold 45 stations in smaller markets. 4 of them are 98.3 and 98.9 in Kingston, Ontario. Remind me to get back to Kingston. I have a very specific question for you. And then, of course, in Brockville, 103.7 and 104.9. So you bought those 4 stations from Bell. So here's a bunch of questions coming at you. Firstly,
sure.
How many radio stations do you guys own now?
With those 4 in the mix, it will be 24.
Okay, and when does the sale become final? Like, does CRTC have to stamp it or something?
Yeah, the CRTC has to approve it. My best guess, based on my experience, is from the moment the application gets submitted to the because of the way this purchase works, it's an asset purchase versus a share purchase. It should take about 8 months. So assuming it was put in when they did the announcement, you would, type in 8 months from that. It should be about that time. Now, the CRTC has been on a radio moratorium. I'm sure they're busy doing other things. I'm sure they're short staffed like everybody else. So, I mean, I would hope in a perfect world for the radio world, our fiscal year end is August 31st. I would love that the CRTC gets this done for August 31st and we start our next fiscal with these stations under our umbrella, because it makes the accounting easy. Will that happen? I don't know. It could be the new year.
Okay, so what happens to, so everyone who's employed at these 45 radio stations across the country, between the moment that announcement came out last week, and you remember that was a big announcement, 4,800 people are getting let go. It's, and there's sort of like, I noticed I would try to figure out, okay, so everyone employed at these 45 radio stations, do they have their jobs until like is Bell going to pay them until the CRTC signs off on this? Like, what happens to those 4 stations between now and the moment that the stamp gets applied by CRTC?
What should happen, and I don't see any reason why it wouldn't happen, but what should happen and what I believe will happen is all of the staff, I can speak for our stations, we've guaranteed to keep everybody that's there. So if they leave, like if someone leaves, they get a better opportunity. I don't know that they would be replaced immediately, because I'm sure Bell would say, well, we'll leave that up to the new guys to decide. If it happened tomorrow, they might go, well, we need someone for the next 8 or 9 months. We're going to make a decision. I would think they'd have a little bit of a chat with us. We would say, yeah, hire someone. My understanding from all the other owners that I've talked to or read about what they've said in the press, everyone else who's bought stations has said the same as me. All the staff stay. So there is an argument to be made that those staff maybe feel relief because they know for the next 8 months, they got a gig.
Interesting, right? Like this 8-month period where, like, I know what happens when you buy a home, right? Like, if heaven forbid there's a fire at one of these stations or something, until you sign off after CRTC, this is Bell Media's problem, right? Like
Bell's running them until we close the deal. No different than a house. It's a good analogy. They've got to keep the house in good order. Like, they can't all of a sudden go, well, we're going to change all the stations to classical because it's cheap or whatever. They got to run them like they're running them. I'm sure that they would probably buy a few less pencils. I'm sure they won't buy new vehicles. I'm sure if they have a backup photocopier somewhere and one breaks, they'll bring in, I'm sure all that would be normal. But they can't really go and change what we're buying. They can't steal equipment out to take it to Toronto. It's got to be all the stuff we've all agreed on we're purchasing. And I believe them to be honorable. They've been very easy to deal with. So it's business as usual, I guess, from the sense of some of the layoffs we've seen, and Bell said there's maybe some more to come in the coming weeks. I hope that people in Kingston, Belleville or Brockville go, hey, like, I'm in a good spot because I'm not on that list anymore. I'm on the going to my FM list.
Well, that's it. Like, so, the details are a little hazy here, but they say, okay, 45 stations sold, 4,800 people let go. It did kind of read like that 4,800 included the people at the 45 stations. But then I guess it could be, let me just tell you, like, when CHCH declared bankruptcy, my buddy FOTM Mark Hebscher was in a room, and they basically said, you don't have a job here anymore because we declared bankruptcy. And because we declared bankruptcy, we don't have to give you severance. So security will walk you out. And then in another room, a new numbered company was basically giving the employees of CHCH that they wanted to keep. This is a new job opening you could apply for. You'll get this job, but the rates might not be exactly the same. Like, so does Bell, when this goes through, does Bell basically terminate all the people at the stations and you rehire them?
Yes, because we're purchasing the assets.
Right.
Now, I can only speak to the negotiations we are part of. I would suspect Bell is, Bell's a good operator. They don't do, they operate their business, but they have good people working there, lawyers and merger and acquisition people. I can say that in my opinion, I thought they were very concerned to make sure the staff were well taken care of and that there would be very little interruptions for the staff and that we would, meet all the things that they currently get, that we would do the same. So, I can tell you that for our stations, obviously we're, and this isn't really a secret. We've done this in every acquisition we've had. We keep everybody because, radio's about the people, Mike. Like, I can get a desk and a transmitter and a computer anywhere, right? What I can't get is, Ben and Reed, who would do a fabulous job in the mornings at Fly FM or Move 98.3. Like, to me, that's the exciting part, is I get to work with them and a dozen other great people. So that's what we look at. We look at the people, because the other stuff you can get anywhere.
Okay, now again, if you can always say, Mike, I'm tapping out on this question because these are some damn personal questions I'm hitting you with here. But
Sure.
like, do they get to be rehired at their existing compensation structure?
I'm not going to speak specific to these, but let me speak to deals we've done in the past. And my answer would be, I would expect our future deals, we would do the exact same thing we've done in the past. If a person worked for, we bought the stations in Niagara, Giant FM and Country 89.1. We bought stations in Simcoe. We bought stations in Peterborough, Cobourg. We're real simple. Mike, whatever you're making with, XYZ company, we're buying it. You're making the same with us. I can tell you that our philosophy has always been, over the years, we bought stations and we look at the benefits package, and our answer has always been the same to the staff. If their benefits package has something that's better than ours, everyone gets the better thing. Like, everybody gets it. So what we've tried to do is, over the years, as we've added stuff, everyone's won, not just the employees that are staying, but the guys that work over there, they get a benefit too, because everybody wins together. I would expect we'll do the exact same thing in Kingston. Obviously, Bell might have a few more layers of stuff that they do for staff that is very different than us, but we'll figure that out.
Well, you can't give them that discount on their Crave stream.
Yeah, exactly. I can't give them free Crave, or I'm sure there's probably.
Although I know a lot of Bell Media people who, they're not getting a great deal. Like, I'm just saying, you'd think I would think they'd get like a great wholesale rate or something on their phone plans, but no, it's really, you got to jump through these hoops to get their minimal discount. I think I get a better discount by calling up the retention.
Yeah, that's the trick, man. I tell you.
Oh yeah, you just get to the retention people because they have the magic packages in their back pocket that you can't find online or anywhere.
I have another theory, and I've held this theory for many years, and I've given this advice to many people. When you deal with one of those big companies, whatever it is, Air Canada, big bank, it doesn't matter.
Rogers, whatever.
I have a feeling you just keep calling back till you get the person that it's their last day.
Oh,
they've had enough, and they're like, "Hey, look, John, I'm with you. Here's the deal. It's my last day. I don't care."
They're out of fucks to give, basically, John. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. It's worked well for me. It takes a lot of calls, though, but you can find them.
So I love what I'm hearing. Like, I still have more questions for you, obviously, because I'm taking my whole hour with you, John. But like, it sounds like this is a very good thing for small market radio in this country. And again, you can only speak to the 4 stations you're buying. You can't speak for what they're going to do at, White Oaks Communications or any of these other places. But I know Zoomer bought a station too, so that's interesting. Yeah. Okay. So you can only speak for what you're doing, but you're basically not going to mess with it. You're going to retain the current employees at their current rates, reasonably so. Yep. And you're going to, like, you don't have any plans to... I don't know, to disrupt anything. Like, you're going to keep the formats at least short term, and you're going to keep things as they are, and just run them as you run your other stations at My Broadcasting Corporation.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, I'm a radio guy, so I'm going to do what radio guys do. We're going to do research in all the markets, and as long as the stations are meeting the expectations of the audience, there'd be no reason to change anything. Obviously, if we saw an opportunity that one station, if it was top 40 or rap or alternative or whatever you want to say, could do better than what it's currently doing, that would be something we'd throw up on the whiteboard as an idea. But as I sit here right today, and I'm sure there's some people that would say, "Oh, you're full of shit," or, that's not true. I look at the stations. There are some trademark issues we have to deal with, because Bell owns trademarks for Bounce Radio, Pure Country, and Move, and they haven't basically said, yeah, go use them. So we're gonna have to create some new brands that way. But I think when you look at the music and who they target and all of that stuff, I don't see a need today, on Valentine's Day 2024, that anything would change other than what we have to change and what we want to change.
Right.
So what would be on the want to change list? Well, I'm a big believer in local news. So they currently don't have local news departments. They're going to have a local news department. That's going to happen. So there will be more local news. Do they do enough stuff in the community? My observation from never having worked inside those walls, just as a guy who's, gone through some social media posts and read the newspapers and kind of kept up with what's going on there, I think we can do a better job in the community, being more of a leader. Not that they did anything wrong. We just work our company at a little bit higher level that way. So I don't think there's going to be any major disruption. Obviously, Move FM does very well in the ratings. So we'd want to obviously continue to build on that. I mean, if you look to, we bought Giant and Country in Welland, and, the stations are a little bit different now than when we bought them. Some would say better. Some would say, oh, I liked it the other way better. Everything we've done is based on research. We didn't change them at all. And all the people that worked there, except for the people that left. And some people left. I don't think we fired anyone that I can remember. A couple people retired. A couple people went on to other opportunities. We hired people to replace them. So same when we did Peterborough, same when we did Welland. Although in Peterborough, we did a big format flip right out of the gates. But again, that was based on the research that we did. Again, I don't, other than just regular radio that would happen 365, no matter who owns them, I don't see any major changes other than the things we're going to add in that I personally believe are part of our secret sauce.
Personally, I like my radio live and local, so this is all music to my ears. I can't believe they don't have local news. I didn't know they didn't have local news in these smaller markets that you bought.
Well, here's where you talk about being technically proficient and being magnetic. So they, as I understand it, and there might be someone on a board somewhere that corrects me, but as I understand it right now, the news for Kingston and Brockville comes from Ottawa. So someone in Ottawa, follows the Kingston police and follows the newspapers and gets the press releases, and they create newscasts that they send from Ottawa to Kingston, which technically proficiently, when you hear it on the radio, it's Kingston news. For me, the magnetic part is when our reporter actually knows the mayor and they see the mayor at Tim Hortons, and the mayor goes, hey, by the way, I don't know if you know this or not, but Billy Bob over there at XYZ just won this incredibly interesting award. You guys should do an interview with them. And we go and do an interview with Billy Bob, and Billy Bob goes, oh, by the way, my kids are playing in this thing and the soccer has a problem. They need to raise funds for whatever. And then we go and tackle that. So I think technically proficient, you could turn it on and go, hey, there's news. Magnetic, I think that's what they're mixing. They're not doing anything, their news people aren't at any events in Kingston. They're not uncovering any stories. They're just reacting to whatever shows up online.
John, do you still listen to Toronto Mic'd?
I do. I'd be honest, I haven't listened. I'm trying to think the last episode I have listened to. I listen to all the ones that have radio people because I'm a radio geek. And any of the music ones that are like bands I like I love Lowest of the Low. I listen to those ones, but I found actually what's interesting is my overall podcast listening has dropped dramatically. Even though like I have one that I kind of listen to routinely, I haven't listened to it as much. And it's not a function of the content. It's just a function of I've been busy.
your habits, etc. Okay, yeah. So I bring up Toronto Mic'd because every month I have these episodes we call Toast.
Yes.
And the current duo that joins me for Toast, we have actually a live Toast happening on this coming Tuesday after Family Day at 10 a.m. So Toast for breakfast. And it's Rob Pruce, who was the keyboardist for Spoons. Yep. And Bob Willett. And Bob Willett, I know him quite well. We've become good buds. And then yesterday I learned Bob, who runs a couple of stations in Kingston for Chorus, But Bob got the what we call in Toronto, Mike, the tap on the shoulder. And
This is Bingo Bob, correct?
Bing, yes, sir. Okay,
Okay, good.
The old Humble and Fred show. So
Yes.
it's funny, while we were chatting, I had a WhatsApp call from Humble Howard, who's in Mexico, but there's something, I could produce that show. So I guess there's something, some fire I have to put out after this call here. But so Bob Willett is currently a free agent,
Yes.
passionate, talented radio guy who still believes, like you, he still believes in radio. Although on Tuesday, I'm going to ask him if he still believes in radio after this tap on the shoulder, because all he did was a great job, and I think he won some awards, and now he's got some time on his hands. So I'm just here on behalf of Bob Willett. I'm letting you know, John, this is a talented guy who's available, and he has Kingston radio experience. I'm just throwing it at you.
Hey, here's what I would say. I believe Bob and I have chatted in the past. I could be wrong, because he was at Pride for a while, right?
He was, for a long time, he was the PD at Proud with
I
Evan.
think we
Oxford.
chatted shortly after that, maybe, and we didn't have anything at the time, but I would certainly tell him to reach out and be on our radar. Big fan of his work, the work he's done at Chorus in Kingston. Those stations are, Big FM does very well. Fresh, I think, is Fresh. It does okay. I don't know. My understanding is Big is the bigger one and Fresh is the smaller one. But when you turn them on, they sound great. And again, they've done some good stuff in the community as well. So here's what I can tell you, whether it's Bob or anyone else with a Bingo in their name or a Tarzan in their name or whatever it is, we're big fans of great radio people, and we certainly always try and fit them in where we can and where it makes sense.
What an industry, right, John, that you can have a passionate, talented person who gets results and wins awards, and then they could get the tap on the shoulder. Like, I just think that's
Yeah.
But you said the T word, Tarzan. Okay.
Yes.
So just anecdotally, I noticed that, Tarzan Dan had a gig on, I don't know, weekends or something at Boom here in Toronto. I don't know. It might have been voice tracking that from Calgary. I'm not sure. But basically, he quit that gig because he got a job at Bell Media he was going to be on, I don't know, 24, what are they called? Bounce?
Yeah, I think it was 22 maybe.
22 maybe. You would know better than me. But after the sale,
it goes down to 3, I think.
3 or 4. And
Yeah.
I just think that's like, this begs the question of, like, there was no leak here. I didn't usually I get a heads up when big stuff's going down. I never got the hey, bunch of stations are being sold by Bell. Like, I didn't get a heads up on this. I sort of found out when the world found out on Twitter. But how long ago, like, how do you get just a call from Deep Throat? They're like, do you have any interest in one of these 45 stations? Like how long has this sale, these things don't happen overnight. How long has this been in the works?
These things don't happen overnight. I can tell you that in my 20 years of radio ownership, obviously we're always working towards deals. We're always dropping hints. We're always working with owners that we think might be retiring. And traditionally it takes, it might take a couple years from the day you say, hey, look, I'm interested in your station, to the day you take over, because, guys got to get things in order and all that kind of stuff. In the case of Bell, they're a bigger broadcaster, so they used more of a traditional system that exists for a lot of big businesses, where they have an intermediary person that basically says, here are the assets that are for sale. If you'd like to bid on them, you're welcome to bid on them. Like, that's a pretty standard process. I think it would be fair to say that Bell's was very much similar to that. I don't actually know when it started, but I can tell you that
you get an NDA first, like, okay, sign this, and then we're gonna ask you some questions.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It was very well done. I thought it was a very easy process, and maybe we're easygoing. I don't know, but I can only speak for us. Everyone we worked with was great. I can tell you that there's a lot of inventory that was available, and we were working on other stuff, and this one kind of plopped down, and like, we looked at each other and said, how is it we've gone 20 years where, like, we usually have one thing in the works, and right now it's like we're at a Golden Corral buffet in Florida where, like, there's everything you could ever imagine.
Loosen that belt. Let's go.
Yeah. So I thought, again, I was surprised I didn't read about it more, but it's probably because they dealt with 7 independent companies, all of who I know most of those people. They're just, they signed an NDA and they're like, hey, I'm just
Yeah,
working
they're
on my
professionals.
business.
They're not
Yeah.
gonna, they
And
want to. Yeah.
again, I know that, I've talked to a bunch of them. They're all super excited. I think a lot of them will do equal to or greater than what Bell is doing in their current operations. I think I don't think anyone, to my knowledge, is thinking they're going to buy them and cut anything. I think they're all going to buy them and add things to them. So I think it's a great
Good
thing
for radio.
for radio. Yeah, it really is.
Like if Bell doesn't want these stations and doesn't have, doesn't find them viable and doesn't want to put the work into it, then sell them to people who give a shit and will help these stations thrive for smaller markets across this country.
Yeah, and I mean, look, I think there's a good track record of people that have bought radio stations and done a better job with them. Someday someone will buy my radio stations, and I hope they do a better job with them. If you believe and you're passionate and your enthusiasm and you have good people that work with you and you take good care of them and you take good care of the community, there's no reason it shouldn't be better.
Okay, well said. Now, I don't know the people at White Oaks at all. If they're listening, I know that White Oaks bought Hits FM 97.7.
Yep.
And I spent lots of time back in the Iron Mike Benson days.
Yes.
And don't forget Scruff Connors. And there's a lot of history there. But there's a gentleman, an FOTM. I like most FOTMs, but not all FOTMs. But Paulie Morris, okay? Paulie Morris built the White House of Rock at Hits FM. And Bell Media tapped him on the shoulder a few years back. And I'm just here to say, if White Oaks is listening, okay, let's bring him home. Let's bring Paulie back home.
Paul's a fine radio gentleman. His daughter is a great broadcaster as well.
And FOTM, Siobhan Morris, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I got to work with her at News Talk 1010 and a huge fan of her work and was always very nice to me. So I have nothing but respect. I was always a big fan of her dad's work. My understanding from the short conversations I've had with the guys at White Oaks, because we send little notes back and forth, and we have done that for a while. They're excited. They're really excited. This is an opportunity for them to sort of get into more mainstream radio versus what they've traditionally done, which is ethnic / religious programming.
Yeah, Christian programming.
They've done a very good job at it. You have to remember they're also the guys that really spearheaded what became AM 740. They got in there before Moses and kind of created that, and I think probably did a really good job with it, and let Moses build off of that. So again, I think it's going to be a big change for them. Obviously, it's a way bigger learning curve than what I'm inheriting. I'm getting stations that are right in my groove.
Right.
They're getting something very different, but I would not be surprised if they reach out to some of those people that made those stations great. Obviously, because we have the stations that compete with them. I don't want them to make them too great. I kind of like them the way they are. But that said, the tide rises all boats, as they say. So if we compete against someone who's great, Standard Radio made Chum FM better, Chum better. Chum made Standard better. New Cap came in and they made somebody else better. So good competition's good for everyone, especially the listeners.
Okay, now you've got a lot going on at my broadcasting corporation, NBC. I'm going to do my Howard Stern there, but going to ask you quickly here, and in exactly 5 minutes, I'll start playing Lowest of the Low, and you can make that next meeting. But I gotta ask you about getting a U.S. radio license, because you have a station in New York. Can you, Vincent, tell me, how can that be?
It's a good question. We're the first Canadian to ever be approved to fully own a radio station in the United States. It was something we've been working on before the pandemic, because at that time, we didn't really feel that there was going to be much more growth for us in Ontario, because at that time, we didn't anticipate Bell selling anything. There weren't many independents like myself left. When we looked at what was maybe going to be on the table someday in the future, we're like, it's okay. It's not going to really change our company a lot. We were looking for how do we grow bigger? So we had kind of started exploring the idea of, hey, we could get into the States. There's lots we could buy, whether it be in New York State or whether we go to Florida. It doesn't matter. And I know a lot of owners in the United States, and they're kind of like older guys looking to retire. So I was like, I know some guys that run good operations that maybe it would work. But it started with would the FCC approve it? So we started with that. We were working actually on a different group of radio stations. Pandemic came along, that got put on pause. And then out of nowhere, this station in Cape Vincent was offered to us, which was interesting because, since the 90s, it's operated primarily as a Kingston radio station. It targets Kingston. Cape Vincent's a very cool yet small community that is really across the water from Kingston. So when it was offered to us, we were kind of like, oh, this kind of fits in. We have stations in that area. And then as the Bell thing got piled on to us, we're like, okay, well, this all really makes sense. Now the question is, will the FCC approve it? And they have some special allowances. For example, a couple from Mexico that operated some Spanish-speaking radio stations, they got approved. There was a couple from Australia that lived in Anchorage, Alaska, or somewhere up in Alaska for years, and the guy that owned their station died. They gave them approval to buy it. So our FCC attorney felt that because we specialize in those smaller markets, that they would say yes. They probably wouldn't let us buy Z100 in New York. So we went for it because we thought it would be fun. Plus, look, I'm a radio guy. I have nothing against CanCon. I think we've built great Canadian artists. I said I'm a fan of the Lowest of the Low, which, is not necessarily obscure, but it's a little bit more obscure than saying I'm a fan of the Tragically Hip or Blue Rodeo. Right. But there's a part of me that, when I grew up and I'd go to, Florida on March break and I'd listen to these great radio stations that didn't have to play any CanCon, there was a part of me that's kind of excited by that idea that I would be allowed to do that. So we were approved by the FCC. We now own it. Now what's going to happen with it? I don't know. Stay tuned. It'll be interesting.
Yeah, I was going to ask, you have some Kingston FM stations here. So what becomes of WLYK FM in Cape Vincent, New York?
Well, I think internet trolls would say it's a huge loophole in the rules, which I would agree with. It's owned by, it's not technically owned by MyFM. It's owned by Andrew and I. And we can lease and buy things as anybody can in their business.
Right.
The FCC doesn't care. And the CRTC doesn't care because the CRTC, Rogers owned a portion of it for years. And before that, a gentleman named John Wright, who started some stations in Kingston, he was part of it. So it's not anything new. It's just new that we would own 100% versus an American being involved. So the CRTC's point of view is it has nothing to do with us because it's an American station.
Right. It's and sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and the FCC goes, hey, whatever happens in Canada has nothing to do with us because we're the FCC. As long as you're meeting our rules, you're good. And, we will. So I don't know what becomes of it. I think it's probably, we're going to focus on the Kingston ones first because they're the, they're the big dogs, so to speak. It might just be a fun little passion project that we use to disturb the market a little bit because we can, and, it's fun.
It's damn fun. It's like those pirate radio stations you used to hear about in the coast of England.
It's kind of like that.
Or I'm on the Mexican radio. You hear about those big Mexican signals that would blast into Texas and stuff. And
we're going to put the station on a boat in the middle of the St. Lawrence.
Look, John, Bell might not know how to make radio a viable business, but I'm glad FOTM John Paul does. And congrats on these purchases. And your heart's you're doing all the right things here. So if I were a radio professional, and as you know from listening to Toronto Mike, I am most definitely not a radio professional, I would want to work for somebody like you.
Well, I certainly appreciate that. I can tell you our business philosophy starts with we're not perfect radio stations. We don't profess to be, but we certainly do give it a good try. And if I'm being completely honest, Mike, it's my team that makes me look like I know what I'm doing because they're phenomenal. I'm blessed to work with such great people, and it's an honor to be featured on your podcast. And it's a real honor to be able to say we're going to own stations that were once chum stations. As a radio geek, that means a lot to me. So I'm super pumped. So thank you.
And that brings us to the end of our 1429th show. You can follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky. I'm at Toronto Mike. John, what's the best way to follow what you're up to on social?
I'm on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn at John Pole at JONPOLE. And anyone's welcome to reach out anytime. I love talking radio.
Okay, you'll hear from Bob Willett shortly.
Happy to.
Much love to all who made this possible. That's Great Lakes Brewery. They have a new podcast called Between Two Fermenters. I produce that show, and it's excellent. Subscribe, enjoy. Palma Pasta. They're going to feed us at TMLX 15 on June 27th. We're going to be at Great Lakes Brewery, 6 to 9 p.m. Put it in your calendar. RecycleMyElectronics.ca. Raymond James Canada. They have a great podcast called the Advantaged Investor Podcast. And, of course, Ridley Funeral Home, Pillars of the Community. This is 1429. My next episode is episode 1430. I have an amazing lineup, and it's going to be, John, you're going to love it. It's a radio episode. It's all about CJCL 1430 going all sports back in 1992.
Brave move. I love it.
See you all then. All right, let me kill this video, and then I'm going to say a proper goodbye to you.